Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Understable Discourse and this week's edition of Chain Reaction. This is where we look back at the event that happened this previous weekend, in this case the Discraft Great Lakes Open, and kind of analyze it from the course perspective, how different hole changes played out, how the players themselves did, and just look at the event overall as a whole. So let's get into it. Now, this past weekend, like I said, was the Discraft Great Lakes Open that went down on the infamous or famous toboggan course. Infamous or famous, whether or not your opinion on the course is a positive or a negative one, but regardless of how you feel, it definitely was an event to watch because of some interesting storylines and kind of how it came down to the wire for both MPO and FPO in a very interesting way. We also saw weather kind of take a toll this weekend when it comes to things like cold weather in the morning for the FPO and some pretty crazy winds across several of the rounds, and it definitely had an effect on the scores and the players themselves. One of the things we're going to take a look at here are the courses themselves. So there was an A pin layout and a B pin layout, even though it was only really 1 or 2 pins max for both the MPO and the FPO. It did have some effect, though. On the A pin layout, the course did play 2.34 strokes over par for the FPO and 0.69 strokes over par for the MPO, which is pretty crazy. A lot of courses don't really finish over par for the MPO. That's a testament to the wind and the weather and maybe some of the course changes themselves. And for the B pin position, it was 1.18 strokes over par and 1.66 strokes under par for the men. Now, one thing to clarify here is that the B pins for both MPO and FPO were played in rounds 3 and 4, and round 4 obviously has the cut involved, so you have a better class of field playing in that layout. So it makes total sense to see that particular layout's average score under par be lower. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind when we look at the discussion of the course itself. But there were some course changes this year we talked about on our episode last week on Wednesday. Hole 2 was one of the first changes that we saw. There was a new pin put in for the MPO, which was short and to the right, up the hill, making for kind of a narrow entrance into a new green position. And ultimately, it didn't really have too much of a discernible difference for the field, other than, it was a new shot for them to throw, and we saw that people adapted to it very, very quickly, and it only resulted in about a fifth of a stroke harder than the typical position at the top of the hill. So not too much to speak about when it comes to the change on hole 2, which I didn't think when we first talked about it that there would be much of a difference with the time it takes to get in and prepare for the course. I really felt like a lot of the pros were going to have that pin position pretty well dialed up, and it seems that they did. Hole 12 was the next change that we saw, where the new pin didn't really do anything for the MPO either, off to the right, but it did have an effect on the FPO field, as it ultimately destroyed any opportunity at birdie for the FPO division, with the exception of Lisa Fakis getting it in round 3 with a 55-foot throw. However, for the most part, it kept FPO from scoring any birdies whatsoever throughout the event. I don't know if I like the change, because it didn't have any difference on the MPO side, and it essentially took a hole and made it significantly harder again for the FPO. Not that I don't like difficult holes, but these courses, we talk a lot about whether or not there should be an MPO course and an FPO course. I think doing something like this doesn't really add to the value of the conversation about having MPO and FPO on the same course. I don't think every hole should be a birdie frenzy, but to make a change that essentially takes away any chance of a birdie, with the exception of throw-ins, is a bit of a difficult thing. And we'll talk about how it's not just about adding distance, because I get it that some FPO players just don't have the distance of others, and there are some FPO players that have a world of difference different than the rest of the field. And I think there are ways we can positively affect the course to show discernible change in that, and we'll talk about that in a second here with a different hole. But this is an example of where just adding distance, I don't think really gained anything. It just took away from the field and the overall experience of the FPO division. The next change that we saw was, I think, where we can see a better way to do this, and that was hole 14 for the FPO. So Typically on hole 14, for the MPO, they go all the way up the hill to the basket at the top. And for the FPO, they left them tee from the same position as the men and play to a basket at the bottom of the hill, traditionally. Now this year, they moved the tee pad up into the field itself and allowed them to play up to the pin position at the top of the hill, similar to the MPO field. And what we called out earlier this in last week's episode was that this would be a real opportunity for the ladies with distance, to have a bit of an advantage and require two incredible shots from those who didn't have distance. And I think it's fine to have a hole that, rewards players who can play longer shots more effectively, as long as the course is balanced with, all kinds of different holes in between, like, shorter holes that are more technical. As long as there's a good mix, I think it's fine to have a hole that says, hey, if you throw really far, you have a bit of an advantage here. It's not impossible for those who don't throw far. Just they're going to have to throw two really great shots in terms of where they land. And we saw that what this essentially did, though, was it didn't really change the overall score outcome, of the FPO field, but it did take last year's birdie rate and cut it in half. And so now we have a hole where 25% of the field is able to birdie it, and about 75% of the field is parring the hole. I think they could make some difference here to make it a little bit better. I'm not sure if that's maybe moving the tee pad up a little bit closer and trying to aim for that like golden 33% birdie rate. But to go from 50% to 25%, I think gave a reward to the players who can throw far effectively, but ultimately didn't punish the FPO format too much. And it still ended up being a par. It's not the world's greatest hole. It could be better, but it's a much more effective change, I think, than what they did on hole 12. Hole 15 is probably the biggest change across the course for both the MPO and the FPO field, because they took the FPO, they pushed them back to last year's MPO tee box, and they moved the MPO back even further and up a hill. And this had some pretty, I don't want to say dramatic, but it's a sizable effect on both FPO and MPO. Now for the FPO, obviously moving it back to the 900 plus foot mark and making it a par 5 did see a stroke increase of about 4/10 to the average for the FPO field. It became a much harder hole for them, but it was challenging, and it made the birdie a reward. It made the birdie something to really be sought after on the hole, which I like that change. For the MPO, it took probably one of the hardest holes on the course and turned it into a hole that really you got to score on. It made it about half a stroke easier from last year, going from like 0.35 over par to 0.15-ish under par for this particular year. And it allowed 7 different eagles to be carded, and some incredible eagles. So I like that it made it so that an eagle all the way down to double, triple bogey was available, and it allowed players to get aggressive if they wanted to. And so I think down the stretch, it was a really great change to kind of have that, hey, hole 16 is not the easiest hole in the world. Hole 17 is a pretty tough hole, and hole 18 can be touchy. Let's put hole 15, let's put something in there where the players, if they want to get aggressive, they might be able to eagle. And if not, it turns into a must birdie hole. So I like the pressure that it adds down the stretch for the MPO field. I think overall, the changes on hole 15 were successful from an FPO and an MPO perspective. Getting into the actual play itself, I think we all can agree we expected players like Holland Handley, we expected players like Missy Gannon, Silva Saarinen to have really the most competitive opportunity out here this weekend on the FPO side. And this was sort of a tournament where Holland was, I think, expected to throw down the gauntlet and actually get some work done. And Silva was the other person kind of in that conversation because how well she's played this year, but she's never played here before. Is she going to be successful? All eyes were kind of on Holland Handley as she's come out of I would say her toughest stretch so far of the season in terms of overall finishes. And we got some really great numbers coming from the field with a tie between Paige and Holland at 9 under par after the first round, showing that Holland was there to play. And Paige, not surprising to see her up there with her distance and ability to control the disc at distance. So not very surprising in the slightest bit we didn't see, and we also had Own in the top 4 with Missy Gannon coming in at 5 under par. And Silva, not really, 2 under par, not terrible, but not really in the conversation after round 1. And going into round 2, as the wind kind of picks up a little bit, we see Holland push her lead a little bit. -2 for the round, so not fantastic, but she's now off into a 2-stroke lead over Own, who puts down a 5 under par round. You got Missy going 3 under to remain at 8 under par for the event, and Paige Pierce has a 2 over round, knocking herself down to 4th place, but still only 4 strokes back from the lead. With the weather and the wind, anything can happen at this course, so not really out of the conversation. Silva has a bit of a better round at 4 under, putting her at 1 stroke behind Paige, leading off the chase card behind. And all eyes are now on Holland Handley, as they had kind of been before the tournament started, is she going to be able to pull ahead and get the win? And she made a great case for herself, shooting 8 down in round 3 to remain in the lead by 2 strokes over Missy at 19 under for the event. Own has another solid round, Paige Pierce has a better round, and Silva kind of has a decent round herself, being still 1 stroke back from Paige going into the final round. And we're kind of squaring up for a, Holland versus Missy final, with Missy and Holland being 5 and 7 strokes clear of the next closest competitor. So, Missy, I think at this point, going into round 4, Missy has something to prove, because she had a lot of success earlier this year, kind of fell off for a while, and typically we see her show up at the end of the season, and she's had a couple solid finishes, and here she is, coming in and pushing Holland for the lead of this event. So we go into round 4, and round 4 is kind of wild, because we start off with, Missy and Holland kind of exchanging some blows, and Holland goes into one of the things that I think Holland does a lot, which really doesn't help her, is she tends to get on these par trains in the middle of rounds sometimes, and Holland ends up parring holes 3 through 7. She gets the birdie on 8, but by that point, Missy had already caught up to her. And with Holland's double bogey on hole 10, Missy now finds herself kind of in the outright lead. And we get through hole 14. So now we're on that final stretch of 15, 16, 17, and 18, a stretch that tends to kill a lot of competitors. It could make and break your entire event. And Missy has, at this point, I would say a comfortable way to finish the round. She ends up taking a bogey on 15, a bogey on 16, par 17, and a bogey on 18. And the reason this was so dramatic was that off the chase card, Silva was birdieing 15, birdieing 16, birdieing 17, and birdieing 18, finishing in the clubhouse at 20 under par for the event by shooting 10 down in the final round. So we now have Missy, who has to close out this stretch, and every time she takes a bogey, she gets closer to Silva and closer to Silva and closer to Silva. And so going into hole 18, she has some strokes to play with, but hole 18, there could be a lot of trouble there if you're not keeping yourself under control. So while we didn't have the battle at the end for the same way for the FPO field, I mean, Holland, you could have made the argument Holland could have been there, but Holland ended up bogeying 16 and double bogeying 18, trying to play a little more aggressive. So, we kind of had a battle at the end, but it was more so someone in the clubhouse with an incredible number, and then the FPO leader having to avoid losing strokes to get to that number. So not a very traditionally competitive finish, but a very competitive finish from what we saw throughout the whole round. Crazy stories across the board. So we have Missy coming in first place, which is a huge win for her, especially as we approach the end of the year player of the year discussion. We have Silva coming in second with the incredible 10 under round. Holland shot the even final round to finish at third place, and Own 8 strokes back in fourth place. Paige had another 2 over round, dropping herself down to fifth. A couple other notable scorers here. You got Kat Murch, who finishes 6 under par, not having the event that she probably really wants. And honestly, you got Valerie Mandujano down in 14th. Cadence Burge tied for 14th. Hannah Blumrus, who definitely has the power to compete out here. down in 15th place. But I think the story, and Ella Hansen, who's someone I thought was going to have a lot of success out here, finishing down at 17th place. Some noticeable people who, finished outside the line. Not really anybody too notable across the board. So I think the story of the day, though, for Missy is definitely her consistency. We talk a lot about what makes Missy a great competitor, and it's not necessarily that she is the best at any one thing. It's that she is fantastic at a lot of things. And the real proving point for that is, aside from tying the 0% at double bogey with a number of other players, Missy didn't lead any stat category anywhere. And that's really rare that the winner of an event doesn't at least lead in one stat category. She didn't lead any of them, except for Silva, who was right behind her, leading in birdie percentage, leading in fairways hit, scramble rate, C2 in regulation, leading in C2 putting, in average putt distance, total putt, strokes gained putting, strokes gained in C2, OB rate. Silva leads in all these different categories. Missy doesn't lead a single one, but that's because Missy put down 4 consistently good rounds, and down the stretch, even though she did finish bogey, bogey, par, bogey, was able to at least mitigate the larger mistakes and end up winning the event. Hopping over to the MPO side, we had quite the interesting event where, we get to see right off the bat Paul McBeth coming off of his win at Idlewild, showcasing that he is still firing at all cylinders, shooting the hot 11 under par in round 1, followed closely by Calvin at 9 under, and then we have Jona Heinonen having an incredible first round, along with Niklas Antala shooting the pair of 8 under pars. And so we've got the 2 Finns on the lead card going into round 2, where we start to see the wind pick up and become a serious factor for the entire field. And we get the cream kind of rising to the top yet again. Calvin shoots a 9 under par round, taking the outright lead over Paul, who shoots a 5 under to follow up his 11, staying in second place. And we now have Gannon and Niklas tied at 14 under par. So we're kind of getting to see what we expect. Here comes Gannon, here comes Paul. Calvin's always in the conversation. And we get to round 3, where really, it's more the same. You see that like 6 to 9 under par area for a lot of these guys dealing with the wind, with Calvin being 6 under par, still leading the field by 2 strokes after round 3, and Gannon and Niklas close behind by 2 strokes. And Paul kind of falls off, shooting another 5 under par. So he goes 11 and then 5 and 5, which you would think would be competitive, but it's keeping him out of that top group. He is only 3 strokes back, tied with Jake Hebenheimer on the chase. So it's still very possible for him. But one name that a lot of us, I would say, expect but didn't expect to be competitive here is we see Ricky Wysocki shooting the 12 under par to move all the way up to tied for 4th place. Tied for 4th place and on the lead card. So Gannon, it's got to be funny for Gannon, because he goes and squares off with Paul McBeth at Idlewild, shakes off the world champion, and then he ends up losing to him at Idlewild. And then the very next week, he starts to kind of, get back to form again. Here comes Ricky Wysocki. It's like, man, can these old vets just leave me alone, please? But the 12 under par from Ricky, not the hot round of round 3. That accolade goes to Aaron Gossage, shooting up, I think, 15 spots in total to make his way into 7th place with a 13 down. Honestly, an incredible round. It was 13 down with a bogey on hole 1, which is crazy to think about. But we go into the final round with an absolute heater of a group in front of us, and the battle starts off, almost immediately with birdies coming from the entire group. I would say the only one here who kind of struggles is Niklas, who only gets 1 birdie in the first 9 holes. So you've got Gannon, you've got Ricky, you've got Calvin, who are just boom, 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 birdies across the board all the way through. Not a single bogey taken from that group until we reach the stretch of 14 through 18. And at that point, the whole entire leaderboard shaken up. You've got Jake Hebenheimer, who's out there vying for that leading position, trying to do the Silva thing of posting up the incredible number before the guys can get into the clubhouse and saying, "You've got to catch me." Unfortunately, Jake takes the bogey on hole 16 and gets himself into a position where the win really isn't possible, but he is going to put himself in the conversation for a potential podium finish. But we get to hole 15. Birdie, birdie, birdie for Calvin, Gannon, Ricky. At this point, Calvin is a stroke or two back and just can't seem to get what he needs. If we go backwards a touch on hole 14, this is, I think, one of the more dramatic holes, is we have an opportunity here. It's the hole that goes up the hill. Gannon takes the par. Ricky takes a bogey. So that's kind of what sets Ricky back by one. That's a big, really, really big deal there. So Ricky's back by one because of hole 14. So they both birdie on hole 15. They both birdie hole 16. Calvin gets the par. So now Calvin's set back another stroke behind. So he has to play super aggressive. He does finish with a birdie on 17 and 18, putting himself into a tie for second place. However, we now go into hole 17. Hole 17, we have absolute wonderful tee shot from Gannon. Then Ricky throws down a tee shot that is like 80 feet to 100 feet past Gannon's, setting himself up for a much easier play into the green. Gannon throws his shot, finds himself below the basket on the hill, probably just inside circle one, and has a tough putt. Ricky gets all the way up. I got to see what distance they have Ricky at, for that putt. Let me take a look here. So according to the stats, they have Ricky at 30 feet for the putt after his second shot. Now, Ricky, obviously no one's perfect, but Ricky is one of those guys who down the stretch, when the moment calls for it, knows how to clutch up and definitely make the hard putt. Well, Ricky misses the 30-footer. That was his opportunity because Gannon missed his putt to tie it up, and he didn't. And it just felt like the wind came out of Ricky's sails there. But he's still back by one going into hole 18. Gannon steps up after watching Calvin throw his shot. And the big controversy here is the first two rounds, Gannon threw a roller off the tee. In both rounds, he ended up bogeying the hole. Is Gannon going to throw the same roller again on this chance to win the event? You see him take two discs up to the tee pad, kind of entertains the one disc, tosses it down, takes his roller disc, and throws probably the best shot, at least the spotter said, the best shot of the entire round, putting himself in prime position for an easy forehand up to the basket to take a birdie. At that point, all pressure is now on Ricky to be able to put pressure on Calvin. Ricky ends up very short on his first shot, so he has to go second. Ends up extremely short in his second. There's practically no way that Ricky is going to throw in on this hole. Gannon takes the mature play, throws a safe shot, and doesn't need to challenge the basket to give himself an out-of-bounds stroke. Ricky gets to circle two, and he ends up taking the par in the hole, and Gannon taps in his par for the big win at D-Glow to become the back-to-back D-Glow winner. He feels incredibly confident on this course and just crushes the event. And I would say the only thing he's probably a little sad about is that the event did not rate higher than he wanted it to, but it is what it is. So an incredible event, start to finish, for both the MPO and the FPO fields. Big wins for Missy and Gannon. Everyone's calling this the Gannon win. So big congrats to both of them as the last event possible for the regular season. And honestly, we see some decent finishes from Paul coming in at 6, from Simon at 9th, a good finish for him. Couple players definitely odd to not see their name up there. You got Isaac Robinson at hole 18. I know it is a distance course, but he's still a better player than that. Kyle Klein down at 24th. You got Sully, who was up there in the conversation. Sully finishing 27th, tied with Anthony Barella at 27th. That's a surprising name considering the distance that we know AB has, but he's just kind of on the struggle bus a little bit right now. And then we have, some decent players missing the cut line, like Ben Calloway missing the cut line. You've got Austin Turner missing the cut line. Adam Hammis missing the cut line. So just some really, really crazy finishes. But we're here. It's playoff time now, and it's going to get kind of crazy. So make sure you stay tuned in. We're got another episode coming out for you on Wednesday. We're going to look ahead to the finish of the season and talk about a few other fun things as well. But thank you so much for being here, for listening. I hope you enjoyed what we saw this weekend in the content in today's episode. Let me know down in the comment section if you enjoyed D-Glow this year. Do you enjoy the course as a whole? Did it meet your expectations? And after the event is over, do you feel comfortable with this event with this venue being the host for the 2026 World Championship event, along with obviously the addition of the Black Locust course, which, by the way, if you want to see a nice little preview of what the Black Locust course could be like, go over to Completely Corey's channel. A little shout out to my boy Corey for the 50 or 60 of you watching. He does a fun video with Matt Givens where they go through what the expected course changes are going to be for the World Championship event, along with some holes that don't really even exist yet, taking a stab at what they're going to look like. Really fun video, good time. You'll have a few laughs along the way. But if you like this video, please make sure to leave a like down below, leave a comment, letting us know what you think, and subscribe. It's the easiest way to support the growth of the channel. Thank you so much for your time, and go out and play some disc golf, watch some disc golf, and until next time, this has been Understable Discourse.